all key tenets making up the emerging racist ideology known as the alt-right. Now, alt-right is short.
This is from a website, and it's going to be linked down below. I do heartily recommend that you go check it out yourself. I'm going to be going through it pretty quickly, just giving you the important bullet points. The site is pepethefrogfaith.wordpress.com. And right now it's only got one article up, The Truth About Pepe the Frog and the Cult of Kek, and this is what I'll be reading to you from. Now, the origin of the term Kek, it came from an onomatopoeia from the Korean language. It was used in the World of Warcraft, and essentially Kek, it came from Korea, and it replaced LOL, lulls, which fell out of favor on the chans. And so they started using Kek to mean LOL, that it's funny. Around the same time, there's the frog meme, the sad frog meme that eventually got titled Pepe. And eventually, these two memes collided. And as time went on, well, let's ask ourselves, what is 4chan? What is 8chan? What is the poll board? What is B? What are these things? And these are these chaotic maelstroms of anonymous shitposting, where the suppressed id, and in this present era where we have ostensible rule by political correctness, and hidden rule by Moloch, there is a very loud and angry and vitriolic id. And the chans were the place where this id manifested itself, where the gestalt entity of the chan becomes larger than the whole. There's another B saying, none of us hate as much as all of us hate. And after the past 16 years of absolutely corrupt politicians, absolute scumbags, not that the corruption doesn't go back further, of course, but George Bush, Barack Obama, it's like the politicians just keep getting worse. There's just so much disgust with the political process. And so all of us have been so happy to see somebody flipping politics on its head, flipping the media on its head. And then we get Donald J. Trump, and of course, Paul falls in love with him, as have we all. Now, the interesting phenomenon that allegedly started happening, and you can argue whether this is confirmation bias or not. It doesn't matter whether it is or not, okay? If probability mattered, casinos wouldn't exist. Let me just put it that way. You started seeing a lot of dubs, of triples, of quads on 4chan, particularly with Donald Trump and with Pepe and with Kek, right? Which at the time just meant LOL. But then somebody noticed something. That Kek was the name of an ancient Egyptian deity, a frog-headed one. Also worth noting, it can also be pronounced Kuk. Another coincidence. And allegedly, I haven't found documentation on this, but the hieroglyphic spelling of Kek, and there's a whole bunch of frog statues going around on Amazon with this, involve a person sitting in front of a computer, and on the other side is internet/meme magic. And thus the cult of Kek was born, the god of chaos, the god of primordial darkness that ushers in the light. Quote, Kek is the deification of the primordial concept of darkness in ancient Egyptian religion. He embodies the time right before the dawn, making him the bringer of the light. Kek is portrayed as a man with a frog head. In hieroglyphics, Kek is portrayed as a man seemingly sitting at a computer screen. Pairs and numbers are very important in the Ogdode mythology. Repeating numbers were used to create the universe according to the Ogdode. Kek is using 4chan as a vessel to spread his message and to usher in a new era of light. Now, thus far, we're just talking about the development of a meme, the strange coincidences that occur. We're talking, right now we're just talking about that gestalt face that represents the alt-right, that represents those of us that are so disaffected with this broken political economic system that we have. But, see, it starts getting weirder. First there's the fact that Kek, Pepe, emerged into plain sight on September 11th. This is when he was denounced by Hillary Clinton, and she shortly thereafter fainted and passed out on 9/11, which again, the 9/11, as well as the terrorist attack, the original 9/11, is also the Benghazi attack that she was responsible for. So we've got these repeating patterns. She declared him an enemy of the state. We have this old woman yelling about a cartoon frog, and she gets brought down on the anniversary of her treachery. Next, and that's pretty weird, but that's just karma, right? That's just normal vibrations. Next, somebody discovers an old 80s track, and it came on an album with a frog holding a magic wand, and it's titled Magic Sound. And the Italian lyrics, I'll just read you some of them. This is just through Google Translate, so, bear with me. Metallic harmony, reality, electronic video clips, civilization's praise, confused progeny of cells of rebels, flying to the universe. I will cross you, star, if you let me see. I'll stop, ooh, ooh. Oh, and by the way, the band that performed that is named Pepe, and that stands for Point Emerging Probably Entering. Once again, we have this probability, and we also have the probably entering, point emerging, probably entering. There's some hermaphroditism to that. There's some gender, sexual confusion over that, and we'll get back to that. We'll get back to that later on. Now, if you look up this band's full album, on the front of it, they have the clock that's outside of Trump Tower. And next, is this enough? Well, there's more. There's also a band from 2010 called Las Pepas, and they have their song, The Frog Pepe. And the lyrics go, he's hopping, he never knows when it's time to stop. He's hopping, please sit down, you're dizzying me. These are a lot of coincidences coming up at the same time with this whole explosion of all of this into the mainstream, all at the same time. And if you want to pretend it's all just coincidence, then feel free. So go check out pepethefrogfaith.wordpress for all the details on that. This is just the quick version. Now, this is something I've been, and not just myself, a few others have been sensing the rise of Kek for a while now. I've been critical of the meme lords, right? I've said that they lack discernment in whom they go after. Forney has been saying the exact same thing about certain members of the alt-right, saying that they're just looking for cheap lulz, cheap Kek, and that they're not actually committed to civilization or decency. Common Filth, he's posted pictures of the Kek statue with methamphetamine next to it. That somebody else posted bragging about it. Praise Kek, here's some methamphetamine for the god Kek. I mean, what a perfect drug that just breaks down all mental barriers without making you drunk. It just eliminates all standards. So this energy has been coming for quite some time, and when I saw all of this laid out, it just clicked. We have resurrected a pagan god, an elder god. Because let's be clear about something. Paganism comes in different flavors. And so there's even certain pagans that they don't have the smell of rot on them. And see, when I say that there's different flavors of paganism, Western paganism, Druidism, Odinism, the Roman pantheon, these pagan cults, they don't have that rot. And I think that it really boils down to two things. First is the necessity of blood sacrifice. The Nords, the cult of Mithras, they're purified. They smell clean from that bull's blood that's covering them. They know what the price of sin is. They pay it. They realize that blood is needed. They understand that there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. That you are going to pay for it. That somebody is going to pay for it. That the ledgers need to be kept balanced at the end of the day. Unlike the cults of Babylon and Egypt, the Western pagans, they get that. They understand the value of blood. The second important thing is hermaphroditism and the feminine principle. When you study the cults of the East and the South, hermaphroditism keeps cropping up again and again. And in fact, we see this with Kek, who has both a male and a female form. And I did a video some time ago, I'll link to it down below, about why hermaphroditism, why a midpoint between male and female is impossible, why it doesn't exist. It's a contradiction in terms. He created them male and female. There is no middle ground. And also this is relevant going back to the Chan culture that spawned Kek, that there is so much sexual confusion on there. Perfect primordial brew for a god-goddess like Kek. Because ultimately, hermaphroditism, it comes back to the feminine principle. Now, in all other animals, all animals on the planet, the female is supreme. Okay, all the other animals, they work and they worship the female, and the female is the only one that matters. Motherhood is the natural biological bond. But in our species, us, halfway between animals and angels, the masculine principle needs to come first. Law and order and truth and honor. That needs to be at the forefront. The man needs to be at the head of the household for there to be a successful family. And again, when you look at the Western paganism, these are patriarchal religions. When you look east, when you look south, every single god in Babylon was too busy sniffing after his consort's pussy to establish any sort of coherent law. Same thing down in Egypt. The worship of the hermaphrodite. A contradiction in terms. You can criticize the Western pagans for missing something. They are lacking the theological virtues. They are lacking grace. But the foundation is not a contradiction in terms. It's not an outright lie. Kek, on the other hand, is. Kek is a hermaphrodite. The best of both worlds and the responsibility of neither. Which, if you've been paying attention, this is what modern feminism advocates. So who is Kek? Well, who is the modern Kek? He is the god of never-ending laughter. Azathoth, the blind, idiot god, laughing maniacally at everything, at creation, in darkness. That is Kek. You know, some people stumbled upon the Exodus quote, which is about the plague of frogs sent to Egypt. And see, the frogs were just the plague. Okay, the frogs were not an embodiment of anything. They're actually going against the land that celebrated Kek, that celebrated these vagaries. People are looking at the wrong one. What they should be looking at is Revelations 16:13. And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are the spirits of devils, working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. The Egyptians held Kek to be a god of the primordial chaos. But they had a particular term. Kek was the bringer in of light, because darkness comes before light. The bringer in of light. And who comes after? Who comes after that? The bringer of light comes after that. Lucifer comes after that.
Right. Yeah. It's a lot more clear when you see it, but it is interesting. And so every post is given an 8-digit number, and because of the volume of posts, you can't do much planning of the number you want. And this is important because on 6/19, so way back in June, someone simply writes, Trump will win, and their post number was all 7s across the board. And this is probably the biggest, boldest example of this dub synchronicity, right?
Yeah, and that's referred to as the prophecy of Kek, because by that point, people had began to associate Pepe with this ancient frog-faced deity that just happened to share some traits of this image board culture.
Right.
It's another example of that synchronicity outside of time thing, because 4chan had been using the word Kek as an alternative to LOL. And they had no idea it was the name of a god. And then eventually they discover that it's the name of a frog-faced god. And when they use this Pepe character so much, and it's a frog-faced god of chaos in this place of absolute chaos.
Right.
And then they dig into the pantheon of Egyptian lore, and they find that this Ogdoad, the ancient Egyptian religion, they attribute repeating digits to the creation of the universe.
It all stacks up. And there's also a little bit more to be said about Kek, I believe, in terms of replacing LOL. How did that come about? It also ties into an aspect of the Korean language, right?
Right. It's just a very obscure place to come from that's completely opposite to what it ended up being. It comes from video games. I think they had some game developer put this little Easter egg in where if you typed LOL, it would come out as Kek in World of Warcraft.
Right, which is a written version of like a snicker, like a...
Yeah, and that comes from the Korean language, like you said.
Right. So all these kind of moving pieces come together and sort of culminate in the discovery that these things do allude to and relate to an ancient Egyptian god named Kek. And when I hear Egyptian, I always kind of perk up because I feel like they really knew their shit.
Oh, yeah.
And it just adds another little bit of flavor to it, wouldn't you say?
I mean, you could say Egypt was just the birthplace of religion in general. I mean, the ancient occult philosophy of Hermeticism and the Kybalion, they all stem from these wise masters of Egypt. So it is very fascinating that Egypt, of all places, is what relates this back, where this all goes back to.
Right. They seem to have the most defined archetypes when it comes to spirits or entities. And that's just another part that makes it so interesting to me. So Kek is this frog-headed deity, a symbol of darkness.
Mm-hmm.
He also represents obscurity and the unknown and thus chaos. And also, from what I read about Kek, it seems that he was seen as that which occurred before light, thus was known as the bringer in of light, kind of like that Lucifer archetype, the light bringer, the trickster in a way.
Yeah, Loki. Yeah. Like we immediately attribute darkness to evil these days, but it was not so black and white with their religion. I get the impression. It's the darkness before the dawn, right? It's the fading of an era into a better era.
Mm-hmm. And you could draw real parallels to that description and the unexpected results of the last election.
Right. And maybe the end of, maybe jumping the gun here, but 4chan saw this as the end of the globalist era because Trump was the chaos candidate, opposing them.
Yeah.
Maybe this was the new dawn of a better age.
It's definitely interesting. And so that's not all, folks, because also talk to us about the way Kek is written in hieroglyphs.
Oh, well, this is interesting. 4chan dug up this statue that was being manufactured, and it was called a Kek statue, and it had these hieroglyphs on the front. And it's a statue of a frog, and the picture, you'd really have to see it to get the full effect, but it seems to be, in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, the picture of a man sitting before a computer, and then behind the computer is this spiral, this strange magical, it almost looks like a DNA strand.
Yeah.
But it's important to note that this is actually incorrect. This does not spell Kek.
Mm-hmm.
It spells Heket, his female equivalent. But it's still very fascinating to me that mistake was made. Like the manufacturer messed up and called this frog statue they put an incorrect name on it.
Mm-hmm. That was going to be one of my questions for you because I've seen the frog statue. It definitely is pretty on the nose in terms of looking like a person sitting at a computer. If you're going to talk about some ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic representation of meme magic, a person at a computer with a DNA strand kind of squiggle would be it.
Right.
But it was so on the nose, I couldn't rule out the possibility that it was some kind of fabrication as a prank. When 4chan's tied to these things, you just never know.
Right. Well, not a prank, an error, but not on 4chan's part. It was still out there in the universe, so it's interesting how it still fits into this whole synchronicity puzzle
Right.
by way of that. You say DNA strand, you could also look at it as the polling of the election as it goes on. When you see the final picture of the way Donald Trump and Hillary's lines on the line graph go up and down, it kind of closely resembles that stranding thing.
Yeah, definitely. And so we've gone through quite a bit of stuff right now, but in a nutshell, it seems like an ancient Egyptian frog-headed deity that embodies chaos called Kek is using 4chan as a vessel to manifest its will. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, and this is just the setup. I mean, this is just Act 1. I say, yeah, climax of Act 1, we get the prophecy of Kek, right? So this ironic worship thing turns into, wow, this might be something really going on here.
Okay. And so where do we go from there? What's Act 2?
All right. Well, now we see Trump win the primaries, and we see this clash of titans rise up as he goes head to head with Hillary. And I think you have to be a 4chaner to kind of understand the hatred that these people have for Hillary, and because they see her as the Illuminati, the globalists, and there's so many more synchronicities around that. The whole dark magic aspect of these elites. I mean, we saw the spirit cooking thing pop up in the election,
right?
So it really just drove home this perception 4chan already had that Hillary was the devil, and now we have this bringer in of light opposing her. They actually made it kind of I'm sure you're familiar with Moloch.
Yes. I was going to ask you about Moloch because, of course, a lot of people talk about the elite and magic, and it seems like Moloch in particular is a deity that the elite and the entrenched power in this country seem to venerate, as well as the goddess Columbia, which I've also heard is possibly synonymous with Moloch. It gets kind of confusing, but we even have an email from the Podesta leaks that a staffer writes to Hillary herself saying they're going to make a sacrifice to Moloch in the backyard. So I am curious your thoughts on the idea that we might have a battle for influence between powerful ancient spirits and maybe a Moloch versus Kek type of dynamic.
Yeah, well, you can see the different ends of the spectrum they could represent, with Kek being the god of chaos. You would say Moloch, oh, god of evil, but I could see Moloch as the god of absolute control, of absolute order, because that's certainly the world the globalists want to establish. They want a world of drones where there is no chaos anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So we see these two, just both ends of the spectrum, and their chosen champions, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, going head to head.
Right. So my next bullet point was the events of 9/11, but is there anything to say before that?
I think that's the next, just the fact that people were praying to Kek now very seriously, and they were asking for something very specific too. As soon as Hillary's health started coming up in the media, as soon as you started seeing the cracks in that facade there, 4chan really started specifically asking for a happening from their god. They wanted to see Hillary's health be exposed on camera, because as much as they were against Hillary, they also despised the mainstream media, which was clearly covering for her at every turn.
Right.
So you would think, okay, if they want to wish something horrible on a woman, maybe that's a nasty thing. But I think more than that, they really wanted to see the media eat their words.
Mm-hmm.
So they were praying for a health crisis, and September 11th comes, and there, for all to see, Hillary has this fainting spell, and she's thrown in the ambulance like a slab of meat.
She's paid off with donors to please, so she don't give a fuck about no one like me. I'm deplorable, inexcusable, and ignorable. The cost of life now unaffordable, and they use that to abort a few million more babies at the last minute. Past witness, suicide or died when they opposed them. Drop a barbell on their neck and they choke them. I guess we have to vote then. Hope the system isn't broken. Go against them, that seems like some kind of death wish. And when we gonna find out who killed Seth Rich? How can I verify my vote's not switched? They should have already had the election called off. Around the same time we saw her getting hauled off. They chucked her in the van like a side of beef. You can tell she was dead, how she slides her feet. Makes me wonder what else they hide from me. They can't win, so I guess that's why they cheat. They chucked her in the van like a side of beef. You can tell she was dead, how she slides her feet. Makes me wonder what else they hide from me. They can't win, so I guess that's why they cheat. They chucked her in the van like a side of beef. You can tell she was dead, how she slides her feet. Makes me wonder what else they hide from me. They can't win, so I guess that's why they cheat. They chucked her in the van like a side of beef. You can tell she was dead, how she slides her feet.
And 4chan is just ecstatic, euphoric over this is manifested. This is exactly what we wanted.
And there was also something interesting about the date 9/11. I mean, if I understand correctly, this is the date that she actually spoke publicly about the Pepe meme, right?
The day after.
The day after. Same 24-hour period.
Right. So that's just the icing on the cake, is right after that, of all things to happen, she comes out with this ridiculous, I mean, for her to make this a talking point in the campaign, it was almost like Kek was winking at us.
Yeah.
Say, yeah, that was me. And here I am.
Exactly. If you're trying to gauge the influence of something, and we're talking about a meme that started in the bowels of the internet, like a very obscure and off the beaten path place, and it rises all the way to the point that the candidate herself is discussing it and trying to raise awareness about it as if it's a threat.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's talk about that for a minute.
Sure.
Isn't it possible that this is an extension of this curse that 4chan has placed on Hillary, that, you know, she's going to sabotage herself. She's going to start talking about this ridiculous frog and get everybody just questioning her lucidity at this point. Or does Hillary have like a court sorcerer on hand who's consulting her about this and saying, we got to uncharge this sigil. We got to take down Pepe.
Damn. I didn't think about that, but historically, the elite have kept some occultists nearby.
Right. I mean, what do you make of it?
Who knows anymore, man? But yeah, it definitely is interesting. And this whole saga does seem kind of textbook for just the way magic or entity influence seems to work. There's always a bit of ambiguity. It's never so absolute that critics wouldn't just doubt it, but a deeper look will definitely make you think if you're being honest with yourself.
Yeah. And we have another synchronicity coming up with that line of thought too. This probably thought. It seems like it, but you can't prove it.
Right. And I think that also happened in this nexus of the 9/11 date and the days right near it.
Yeah. We discover Châtelet. This is another thing outside of time that we bring back into this fold. This record from the 80s called Magic Sound is the label.
Of all things for it to be called.
Right. And, well, of all things for the song to be called, the word printed on it is Pepe. This is the name of the album, Pepe, in acronym form. And it comes down to, I think it's point, emerging, probably entering. You can see how that just fits right in with this, what we're talking about here, this probably. And it also goes back to digits, the gets. See, 4chan says that Kek speaks to them through dubs, through repeating digits, and it's a probability thing. It's a random number generator, like you said.
So I think we have an album called Magic Sound by a band called Pepe, and the name of the song is Châtelet.
Right. And on the album, this is important, this is the most important part, there's a green frog printed on the album.
Who's holding
With
a magic wand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, damn. And then if that wasn't enough for you, the band's full album also has some interesting imagery.
Yeah, it's got a clock and a man facing a clock. And we're looking at the man top down. And he's a fair-haired man looking at a clock, which closely resembles the Trump Tower clock.
Right.
And this man actually is arranged within this 8-pointed symbol, kind of. And it looks a lot like the chaos magic symbol, this 8-directional little asterisks.
Yeah. And that's a crazy one. And, you know, if you wanted to even throw another log on the fire, you could get into the lyrics of this song, which are pretty eerily relatable to the saga, aren't they?
Yeah, they're all about bending reality. and rising up and being I think it says, kind of a failure revolutionary. And that kind of, once again, sums up 4chan. You know, they post and they do a lot of talking, but nobody's doing a lot of action in our society.
Right. And because this is a French band from the 80s, the lyrics have to be translated. And I wrote down verse 1, and that would be why it doesn't rhyme. But when you translate it, it says, cosmic absolute, regular reality, breath of an image concept, syntony of civilizations, confused descendants of rebel cells. I fly towards the universe. I'll pass through it. If you are a star, show yourself. I will stop. And that reads like an incantation of some kind. When you look at the probability of what the song would be about, most likely it'd be about some stupid love relationship or breakup like 90% of songs are.
Yeah.
But this one is invoking the universe, images and concepts, cosmic absolute. I mean,
Yeah.
Jesus, man.
And it's a disco song. I think you said French, but I think it's actually Italian.
Oh.
It's an Italian disco song. So for it to be talking about these things in a club setting, like, why, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think my mistake, the reason why I had that it was a French band is because when you talk about what might be next or where Kek might be going now that Trump has won the election, you do have on your website, hint, keep an eye on France in 2017. Can you talk about the suspicion there?
Right. So 4chan is kind of seized onto Kek as this idea of liberating the world from this Illuminati, dark magic, globalist control. And we see now more stages for that battle to happen again in other European countries that are being, you know, swallowed up into this Marxist, you know, anti-free speech, really, really gross peasant class fostering politics that seems to be spreading the world.
The globalist nanny state.
Yeah, exactly. And we see a lot of Trump equivalent candidates coming up in these countries. So now we're looking towards Kek to you know, keep doing the work. And Brexit was the first example of this, even before the election. So we're wanting to see this chain continue elsewhere.
Right. That makes sense. And I guess I would take a second to say that for me, I don't want there to be a perception that I'm a Trump guy. I would consider myself a neutral observer who is definitely glad the Clinton network went down, but I'm just not as optimistic as 4chan might be about what's replacing it. You know, just because we have a new group of old white guys lining their pockets, that's not exactly the radical change that would get me excited. But if you want a perfect election, you're going to be waiting a long fucking time. So
right.
That said, we should also talk about the Clinton claim a little bit more. The white nationalist alt-right Nazi association. Of course, the mainstream is trying to paint anything associated with the Trump campaign with this brush, and it applies to the Pepe meme as well a bit. But symbols can be used for anything, and if Kek is an Egyptian deity, calling the whole thing white nationalist is a little bit backwards.
Yeah.
But what would you say about those claims?
Well, it's nonsense. It's grasping at straws. Like you said, this racist label, it's like a hex they cast on anybody who opposes them. They can just strike them down with this label of, you know, oh, you're an evil person, you're racist. I mean, the whole idea of memes is that they can be utilized for anything. They're so universally applicable. So to say that Pepe is a white nationalist symbol, sure, I'm sure white nationalists have used him, but I mean, if Mickey Mouse was put on a KKK flyer, you wouldn't now say that Mickey Mouse is a white nationalist symbol.
Right. Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yeah, the symbols themselves are neutral and really can be used for whatever. And you could, if you're in the mainstream media and you want to cherry pick some things and make something seem exceptionally negative, you can craft that tale with the bullet points they have, but there's just so much more to the story as we're talking about. And if people are still doubting the influence of a cartoon frog, not only did Hillary personally comment on it, but Trump also retweeted it at one point, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, that was her straw that she was grasping at. Oh, look, Trump has used this white nationalist symbol. I think it was Trump's son, actually.
Ah.
But it's just a total coincidence or synchronicity. you want to look at it like that.
Right. I mean, it touched both major party candidates. With all the things on their plate, they both dedicated at least a small sliver of time to some cartoon frog from 4chan.
Right.
Can't believe it, man.
They really brought him out into the world.
Right.
It's absurd.
It is. And so what does the creator of Pepe have to say about all this? Has he been addressed since this has all happened?
Yeah, the mainstream dug him out of the gutter to comment on it. But it's just like I said before, I think he was in the bag for Hillary. Maybe they slipped him some money. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not relevant.
Yeah. He's just a vessel.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, give him his props for drawing a cool looking character that a lot of people can associate with. But it was co-opted by another group. So it's not about him anymore,
mm-hmm.
or what he thinks. And this is kind of the nature of art, right? The idea of the muse. You channel things into the world. It's not you making them.
Exactly. Another good point. And so when it comes to the synchronicities that happened and you making the website that you made, people, of course, started seeing other amazing syncs and sending things to you. And tell us about what seems to be the oldest connection between Pepe and Trump with this old Donald Trump's real estate tycoon video game. I thought this was pretty mind-blowing, man.
Yeah, I mean, there are a ton of these, right? We've only just touched the surface of all these synchronicities. But the Donald Trump video game, the real estate tycoon, right? There's this little simulator game he put out. And within the game, you decide what your logo is going to be for your company. And they have all these just random generic logos. And one of them is Pepe, the word Pepe.
Right. A corporate name you can choose called Pepe. And the logo behind it seems to be a winding road symbol, which you could definitely connect to this saga if you wanted to. It is quite a winding road, especially if you were going to plant something in the mid-90s about something that was going to happen in 2016.
Well, that leads us right into another synchronicity where one of the Mandarin translations of Kek is drama or theater. And man, if you were following this election, you could not write a more up and down roller coaster movie than this cycle that we all experienced happen before us.
Yeah.
This election is just absurd with all its twists and turns.
Absolutely.
So that equivalent, and in German, the word Kek, I think spelled with CK, is bold and daring. And it all just goes into this character that we've all associated with Pepe on 4chan of this levity and, trolling and laughing in the face of the establishment.
Right. And, obviously there's been a lot of interaction in 4chan with this entity. Is there anything more you could say to flesh out its personality or these interactions? Because I think that to me is the most fascinating thing, is getting insight into this kind of rare situation of communication with an entity. It always seems kind of vague. It always seems kind of loose. But in a situation like this, I assume you might be able to get a little bit more detail about this maybe personality type or just how it interacts with people.
Yeah, definitely. Well, like we talked about, 4chan takes things and changes them slightly, right? Mm-hmm. So what we didn't mention before is the fact that at some point within this timeline, before Trump really, but in between adopting Sad Pepe, we transform him into Smug Pepe, where it's a frog who has this very smug expression on it, this very sly grin, and he's holding up his finger and thumb to his chin and looking at you knowingly. And it was very perplexing to us that Pepe underwent this transformation where he now has this secret that he's harboring. And there was really no justification for the meme. Like we talk about how memes are very competitive and they have to resonate in the right way. There was really none of that for this meme. It just came out of the ether. And people, the common response to posting that picture, people would say, "Why so smug, Pepe? What do you know?" And it's almost like a precursor to Trump winning. And then you see the media having to eat their words and all this blowing up in their faces. People are feeling very smug now. So it's another aspect of the puzzle. It's so strange. that it worked out like that.
Right. And so I'm curious, does Kek communicate with the members of 4chan in any other way beyond through the synchronicity of double-digit posts?
No, but it's significant enough that it seems like almost what more could you ask for? You'll just see it every day on 4chan. Someone will post a message that's, in some way significant, and their post number will be 77. They'll post Kek works in mysterious ways, and 1% chance goes to them. They get the dubs in that thread.
Right. It's almost like a digital Ouija board of some kind, and you keep getting the response.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. So you were studying magic before this happened, I understand, and knowing what you know about chaos magic, would you consider this saga to be in line with what you might expect?
It is the most perfect example of chaos magic working that you could ever imagine. And I'll explain to you why.
Sure.
4chan, maybe people don't see the appeal of posting on an image board. Some people, they're readers, or they read comic books. And some people, this is just their hobby, because once you start getting into it, you realize it's so entertaining, and there's so much on the table. It's a buffet of emotional states. It really is. You'll go into one thread and you'll get into an argument with somebody, and you'll get very angry, and then you'll go into another thread and you'll just be laughing at all this banter going back and forth. And then you'll go into another thread and everybody's just, lamenting, they're airing out their woes, and you get very sad. So you get to ride the whole spectrum of the emotional roller coaster, within the span of an hour, just browsing these image boards. And the principle in chaos magic is that these high energy, another synchronicity, high energy, Trump's slogan, these high energy emotional states, they are what charge sigils. And so while you're browsing through these emotional states on 4chan, you're also seeing Pepe's, because he's a very popular meme. So the idea is maybe this is how people were charging this sigil with all this power, just by the mechanics of the image board. The other way to charge a sigil that's very significant is trance state. Like when you're watching TV and it's the time when your eyes glaze over, all right? That's seen as this idea of the subconscious membrane kind of loosening up, and now you can send your energy out into the world or be manipulated. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But yeah, this state of no mind, this meditative state, that's another way to charge a sigil. Another way is sexual stimulation. And there's a lot of porn posted on these image boards. So every way you could charge a sigil, it's all here in this little grab bag on 4chan. So it's the laboratory for making chaos magic happen. It's insane, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it does kind of call into question how consciousness interacts with reality. And it's kind of a special case, or a special case study, because of 4chan's nature to kind of get away from the individual and kind of work in a more collective way. It creates a real great laboratory type setting to test these things out, man.
Yeah. There's another story of meme magic before this ever happened. There was kind of this trial run where people kind of tuned into this power. As we know, 4chan's really into trolls and trolling and pranking the world. And a couple of years ago, they thought it'd be funny to spread Ebola back into the world. So this was kind of the proto Pepe. They made this sigil, this image called Ebola-chan, just some anime girl, because 4chan's all about that stuff. And they embedded their desire, jokingly at first, to hasten the spread of Ebola. And we saw that in the news cycle a couple of years ago. It worked. So that was kind of the first trial run of meme magic. And they kind of eased off the pedal on that once they realized, wow, we're really maybe affecting the world here just with our intent.
Right. And I did hear about that. And I think even outside of that, 4chan does have some other interactions with magic over its existence, right?
How so? What do you mean?
Well, I read about another story that seemed to get a little bit of attention could have been, again, a troll, but someone seemingly made an egregore of My Little Pony that didn't go quite so well.
You'd have to tell me that one. That sounds great.
Oh, well, from what I read, they decided to make this egregore out of My Little Pony. Very appropriate for 4chan. And
Right.
it became some type of negative entity, and it started speaking to them in their head so loudly they couldn't hear other thoughts or form clarity. It resulted in headaches and being kept up at night, and that eventually just stopped.
Wow.
Weird stuff, and it could just be people getting attention, but these things stack up, and you got to look at all of them.
Right. Well, that sounds like the classic word of caution on the idea of a tulpa, of fragmenting your consciousness into another personality like that. It is funny how we see these things manifesting in the digital world to people who aren't even aware of what they're doing. And then you go back and you see, oh, well, that was chaos magic. That was a tulpa.
Yeah. You also mentioned to me that in the past couple of weeks, you've been searching for the thread that ties all this meme magic business into something more profound or related to old world occultism. Where are you on that search? Is there anything more to be said about that?
Yeah, well, that thread is the Egyptian philosophy, and another synchronicity with the whole Kek and going back to the old Egyptian occult world. The Kybalion is a very kind of a cornerstone text in this esoteric philosophy sphere. I think, Freemasons have adopted it, all different kinds. And you can kind of see how it's the foundation even of very mainstream religions like Christianity and Buddhism. It really breaks down the basics of belief. And I thought it was so interesting reading this, talking, one of the principles is, the principle of the pendulum and how there's a forward and backward swing to everything. And you see that in Kek. You see, okay, we were headed towards this direction, and now all of a sudden Kek appears, and now society is going back on this PC social justice warrior momentum. And then we're swinging back now maybe towards more of a conservative culture. Yeah, so just all these principles within ancient Egyptian texts. I had no idea that really this was the crucible. Ancient Egypt was really the crucible of all this belief and faith.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. It definitely seems to have been. And, if this is a real aspect of reality, I guess based on kind of what we're talking about ancient Egypt, do you think that there was a time in history where it might have been more commonly accepted among people? Is this something that has been purposefully hidden from people?
Yeah, I think, well, and I talk about this in my book, right? You're imagining things. The occult has always been there for those who seek it, but the reality is people don't want that power. They say they do, but when you have the tools to shape your own destiny, now you are responsible for your own destiny. And most people don't really want that responsibility. It's the saying from the Bible, and this actually came from ancient Egypt, don't throw pearls before swine. And the significant detail there is throwing the pearl. The swine aren't massing you, aren't mobbing you for these little nuggets of knowledge. They're not interested. So don't bother with them. Let the people who are interested find you. So I don't know if it's been so deliberately hidden, but it seems to be like it's definitely wielded only by very evil, corrupt people these days. I think back then, the world might have been ruled by a more benevolent class of mystics than we see today.
Right. That's a theme that I've had a lot of guests bring up, people who've really studied this stuff deep. It definitely is a popular thought to think that when you're talking about Egyptian pharaohs, these people were their respected leaders because they were so knowledgeable and wise in these occult realms, as opposed to today where it just seems like any old body who's got in with the network of good old boys can kind of get to a privileged position, and it isn't based on their merit anymore.
Right. And that's the big complaint, right? When you take away the meritocracy of the world, that's where there's problems. And, that's where people make conspiracies about the Jews or the reptiles or whatever you want to call them. really the root evil there is the fact that, well, no matter what you do, you don't have a contact in this dark society, so you're not going to get the fruits of your labor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so is there anything else that can be said about the elite's magical knowledge or the idea of them using these tools regularly? We talked about Moloch a little bit, but have you seen other things that make you curious?
Yeah, well, I have a very good example of this. I think a corporate logo is a sigil in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of touched on this earlier before. See, there's the idea in esoteric philosophy that there is no such thing as a one-way street. Everything is back and forth. Everything is a double-edged sword. So when you see a sigil and you're charging your sigil, right, eventually your sigil is now going to be its own entity, and it's going to be charging other people. It's going to be directing energy towards other people. So that's what I see a logo as. I see a logo almost as like an anti-sigil, where it's out there in the world and it's there to manipulate people. It's there to embed into someone else's subconscious, whereas a normal sigil would be you taking your subconscious, putting it out into the world. This is the opposite, you see.
Mm-hmm. I think there's definitely something to that, because the biggest corporations on the planet have logos that allude to ancient symbols in most cases. They have mascots that do the same. They invoke Greek, Roman, Egyptian archetypes in a weird way, and it happens more often than it doesn't. And so what's the deal there? There's got to be something going on. I mean, these also aren't just mid-level players of modest wealth. I mean, these are the motherfucking trillionaires on the planet. And so something's going on. We also see it a lot in NASA, naming missions Apollo and naming meteors things like OSIRIS-REx. I mean, strange. Why would they be doing that?
Very strange. And just as the practice itself, when you're talking about money being spent, why is it so important for them to shill out millions of dollars just to flash their brand logo? Like Coca-Cola spends $1 million to fly around their symbol on a blimp. Why? I understand advertising and convincing someone to do something, but that's not what a logo is.
Right.
It doesn't come with a message, telling you to buy something. It's just a logo. And these Super Bowl advertisements, it'll be just a story, some emotionally stirring image, and it'll flash a logo, and it's over, and you don't even know what you've been sold.
Right. And money itself, look at the dollar bill. It's a goddamn soup of esoteric symbols, hidden and unhidden.
Oh, yeah.
It's deep.
Yeah, and it's such a great example of a charged sigil, because it's just paper, but we've charged it with this power, and now it's something you would kill your mother over if you're a certain type of person.
Amen. Yeah, I always say, if aliens came down and were like, how do you do things on this planet? And we say, well, nothing gets done unless you've exchanged some green paper. Yeah, I know that guy's over there starving and dying, but we can't do anything. We can't get him the food. He doesn't have the green paper. And it would just seem so insane. And I would think the conclusion they would come to is, man, all these people are under some kind of spell.
Well, my take on that is they would say, oh, look at these chaos magic primates. They're just starting to grasp the power of these sigils. Look how primitive their technology is with their sigil craft. Because I do look at this as a type of technology.
Yeah.
You apply, and it's a neutral thing, like we talked about. It's how you use it, but it's a tool.
Right.
To get things done in the universe, to channel desire into outcome.
And the connection between magic and technology can't be overstated, especially if you look at the deep state of the 60s and 70s, even up till today. They're constantly being accused of being occultists. If you talk about Jack Parsons and the rocketry program, strange stuff. There always seems to be some type of occult connection between some of the most brilliant minds of science and technology and this stuff.
Right. Well, I learned this from your podcast, actually. The fact that the pentagram revolutionized the rocket engine, that they found out that's a more useful way to distribute the lift force is in the shape of a pentagram.
Boom. Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah. And you just find these things so often, you have to start wondering, where do the coincidences end and something significant begin?
Amen. So if we're going to revisit the Pepe Kek thing that we're talking about, There are other synchronicities that I think are really interesting. One that I really loved, I guess, comes from a top memologist dubbed Gobekli Pepe, which is the most perfect name. I guess he's found on Twitter, but he found something about a fan-made version of Pokemon called Pokemon Chaos, of all things. Can you tell us about this one?
Yeah, well, I didn't know that, some people are so into Pokemon that they make their own games for it.
Man.
So that was interesting to learn. And one of these games was called Pokemon Chaos. And this guy, he made his whole roster of Pokemons, and he named one of them Chatelet. And the design of this Pokemon looks a lot like Pepe. It's a sad-looking amphibian. So once again, this very strange stack of coincidences that seem to point towards this god form.
Right. I love that one, man. I mean, it's kind of one of those things you have to see, and if you're a little bit familiar with Pokemon, I mean, it might make even more sense to you, but calling the thing Chatelet, of all the possible names, if people don't remember, that is the name of the song that we talked about from the 80s CD. And another point about Chatelet, because we did talk about it being a translation, the song lyrics needing to be translated, Chandelier is the one untranslatable word, right? I mean,
yeah.
Apparently there's no equivalent.
Right. So it just, once again, like a good meme, it becomes something you can kind of project your own meaning onto. And like, the nature of Kek, there's still this element of the obscure within all this, what you can make of it. There's still this black hole that you just have to fill with your own thing. And we see that, like on every scale of this phenomenon, there's a Chatelet. There's a gap you have to fill.